Welcome back. The United Nations has repeatedly accused the Houthis of looting humanitarian aid and prevent its delivery to war-affected people. According to local sources, those aids are sold in the black market, which is supported by Houthi officials. The following report has more on this.
In Geneva, the United Nations and the humanitarian community launched the Yemen Humanitarian Response Plan for the current year 2023, with the goal of raising $4.3 billion to help the 17.3 million most vulnerable people who require humanitarian assistance as a result of the conflict, displacement, and economic decline exacerbated by natural disasters. Due to the war that started in late March 2015, two-thirds of Yemen's population, or 21.6 million people, will require humanitarian assistance and protection services this year. One of the biggest challenges facing humanitarian work in Yemen is the funding gap, despite the enormous funds required by the annual Humanitarian Response Plan and the pledges announced by donors over the past years. Many Yemenis believe that despite spending billions of dollars annually on the implementation of the UN plan, it does not seem to have a positive impact either on humanitarian or economic situation, as Yemen is the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with rising rates of poverty, unemployment, and deterioration of social services. The distribution of humanitarian aid, as well as the interference of local organizations affiliated with them in the relief process and its distribution through specific names or fake lists, is a problem that many Yemenis, particularly in areas controlled by the Houthi militia, complain about. As a result, the aid eventually ends up being sold on the black market. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Yemen anticipates that humanitarian needs will remain constant in 2023, and that the resilience of the vulnerable population will deteriorate as a result of the ongoing collapse of basic services. As a result of the instability of the Yemeni rial, millions of Yemenis are suffering from the complex effects of violence, the ongoing economic crisis, and severe funding shortages, which have resulted in high levels of food insecurity and a lack of access to basic services after more than 9 years of conflict. Martin Griffiths, the United Nations humanitarian coordinator, stated in his latest briefing to the UN Security Council that the number of people in Yemen in need of humanitarian assistance and protection services will reach 21.6 million people by 2023.
I, of course, also fear that 2023 will be another extremely difficult year for the people of Yemen. Humanitarian needs remain alarmingly high as the country's economy continues to weaken and basic services hang by a thread. Meanwhile, people's access to humanitarian assistance is being impeded as aid agencies are forced to contend with an increasingly challenging operating environment, as well as a funding landscape which does not encourage. Mr. President, in 2023, this year, an estimated 21.6 million people across Yemen will need humanitarian assistance and protection services, and it is precisely because this is such a high percentage of the total population of Yemen that the United Nations has for so long talked about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen as being the worst that we see globally.
The UN representative pleaded with the international community to support the new humanitarian appeal and close funding gaps for life-saving programs in order to continue helping the Yemeni people.